My spiritual beginnings with Jesus back in 1973, a long time ago. I've shared with you before some of the things that made up my shift in perspective, you might say. And it radically shifted. In fact, that's been God's kind of theme with me in my life, is just when I think I know something, God shifts me. My whole perspective changes. In fact, God gave me, when I started reading the Bible, really reading the Bible and taking that in and finding that God's in everything and doing all sorts of cool stuff. And God isn't just a concept in my mind, that God is a living force all around me. And God changes things and changes me and all of this and shifting all of reality and this and that. He gave me a verse, and some of you know this verse. It's from Isaiah chapter 43, verse 19. And to a people, the people of Israel, who were in Babylonia at the time, they had been taken out of their homeland, and they had lived for years, 70 years to be precise, a couple generations worth. They lived in Babylonia, in a foreign land, and they cried out to God, God, we want to go home. We want to go home. And God says a number of things to them in the latter chapters of Isaiah, but particularly in 43:19, God says, behold, I am doing a new thing. Can you see it? I will make a way in the wilderness, a road in the wilderness, and I will make rivers in the desert. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Can't you see it? And that's been kind of the echo, the theme of my whole life is God will be showing me new stuff that He's doing all the time, in, around me, through me. Always a surprise, and God delights, I think, in kind of taking my life and rattling me around and shaking me up and taking me from one perspective, shifting me from one perspective to a wider perspective, a bigger perspective, and opening my eyes and going, oh my goodness. In fact, this whole book, the whole Bible, is about people being shifted from one perspective to another. Old Testament, New Testament, Moses and Old Testament figures to New Testament figures being shifted. In this book, shift happens, okay? Over and over and over again. And God is bringing people into a new and open vision, a bigger vision of what life is all about. And it's always a surprise, a delightful surprise. And He can do that with us today. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Can't you see it? I brought a friend with me this morning. I mentioned him last week. He was sitting in my parents' garden. And when I went out to California for my dad's funeral, I just felt attracted to him. And I don't know how old he is. He's pretty raggedy looking to barely make out who he is. But he sits in the garden and he's a saint. Can you figure out which saint he is? Sits in the garden. Certainly can't tell from the face. He's St. Francis of Assisi. The one who preached to birds and brother, sun, sister, moon. The saint that was connected to nature in some really cool ways. St. Francis, humble, poor, took vows of poverty. But this guy reminds me of that shift in perspective that Francis lived out to the best that he could, that whole shift process. He was different. He was a different sort of person, talked to animals and was in touch with nature and just loved everybody, full of mercy, full of love, St. Francis of Assisi. And so I brought him today because more than any, you can have your own saints, but St. Francis reminds me of that whole shift in perspective, that if we're going to live for Jesus Christ, that we need to be open, that's part of, a big part of the journey, is letting God shift us, and He's a major shifter for me. So He's going to sit there and kind of remind us of being shifted. But I'd like to talk about shifts, what that means to be shifted, to be kind of moved. And I know we resist that stuff too, because we resist change and all of this. But to allow God, to give God permission to shift us from one place over to another is absolutely vital for our spiritual journey if you want to grow in Christ. If you want to discover the abundance that God has for you in this life and in the next, it's important to be shifted from one place, point A to point B. So I'd like us to turn, if you will, to John chapter 12. John chapter 12, because this is an important part of the shifting process. Important part of the shifting process. John chapter 12, and if anybody has a page number in the dark blue Bibles, shout it out. Yes? 83. 83? All righty. And that would be in the New Testament, so that's because it starts the numbering all over again. Page 83 in the New Testament. John chapter 12. And I'm going to look specifically at verses 20 through 24. I guess I could read 26 too, but that section in there, some of you may have subtitles. Mine says, the Greeks seek Jesus. But this is a really tense time, okay, just to give you a little background. This is Jesus' last week of life here on earth. Last week of life, he enters Jerusalem, and he's got one more week to live. This is like Holy Week that we will be celebrating, at Easter time in a few months, couple months. But it's tense, and people welcome him into Jerusalem with the palm branches and all of that stuff, and he comes in and throws furniture around in the temple, and it doesn't start off well for the powers that be. But this is an intense time. And we've got the woman who Mary comes and anoints his feet for burial, and I mean, he's looking to his death. He knows he's going to be killed. This is going to be a dramatic exit, but it's tense. I mean, the tension fills the air. And these Greeks come up. It's a Passover, so there's like visitors from all over the place, Jews from all over the place, come to Jerusalem for Passover feast. Huge feast. And just tons and tons of people, big crowds. It's like Walmart on Saturday, but worse. I mean, there's just tons of people. And these Greeks come up and they say, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." They come up to Philip and say, "Sir," this is in verse 21, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." In fact, a better translation is like, "Sir, we wish to behold Jesus." That's the Greek word. It's more than just like, I want to see him, like you want to behold him. I want to experience Jesus. I want to be with him. I want to see what's going on. I see this Jesus guy. So they're all excited about this. And then you go on to Philip told Andrew. Andrew told Philip, came to Jesus. And then in verse 23 it says, Jesus answered them. Okay, the thing is, we want to behold Jesus. Who is this guy? What's it all about? Who is this Jesus guy? I want to experience him. And Jesus answered them and said, in verse 23, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." Okay, now remember, whenever you come across the word glory in the Bible, the word glory means, a lot of times you see light rays coming out of people or God or whatever. But the essential meaning of glory means that your inner core, who you are, the very core of your being, what makes you tick, who you truly are, that's what shines out. That's being revealed. When you come across glory, whether it's God's glory in the Bible or glory of man or human beings or the glory of nature or whatever it is, you're getting to taste an experience of who that person really is. That's what glory is. It's the inner being being revealed out. The glory of nature, like when you see a Drummond Island sunset and it's all red and clouds and all this stuff, you're tasting the glory of nature, the glory of the creation. You're getting just a taste of that, but you know it, right? Or some beautiful snowy day when you're inside, you're not having to struggle with snow or shovel it or whatever, but you're actually enjoying it. And the beautiful snowbanks and all of that. And you go, wow, that's so beautiful. It's the glory. Or God, you experience God. You're experiencing some of God's glory. Or you can experience people's glory too. Anyway, glory reveals the true nature of who you are. So Jesus is saying, this is the time. This is when the Son of Man, that's Jesus, that's one of his titles, is going to be glorified. This is the real deal, folks. Sir, we want to see Jesus. We want to behold Jesus. Here's the real deal. Here's the glory of the guy you're looking for. And then the next words that he's about to say is a jaw dropper. Because you're expecting, if this guy's God, all the miracles that he did and all this stuff that we experience, we want to see his glory, it's going to be like fireworks. and probably fireworks that will kick the Romans out of Jerusalem and out of Israel, the occupying force. We won't have all those Romans to deal with anymore. We'll be our own people. He'll be the military. He'll beat up all our enemies. This is what the glory of God looks like, right? We're ready for it. Come on, Jesus, show us your glory. And Jesus says this, truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And then in 25 he says, he who loves his life loses it. And he who hates his life in this world will keep it to life eternal. If anyone serves me, he must follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, my Father will honor him. And I can just imagine that there's like this awkward silence, like, what? What? What's this stuff about stuff dying? What's this stuff about losing your life? What's going on? And it took time, even for the disciples, to figure this out, at least a little bit. That there's something intrinsic, something built in. If you want to experience victory in your life, if you want to experience happiness in your life, if you want to experience fullness and love and things are good and success and purpose and all this stuff, if you want to experience the fullness of life, which we all want to do, there's something. You don't get it by going after it. In fact, that's a sure way. Jesus said, you lose your life. If you pursue life, it doesn't happen that way. In fact, the very glory of God, the nature of God, get this, to know and understand the nature of God, something has to die before there's life, or knowledge, or wisdom, or abundance, or riches, or success. Something has to die. And Jesus proved that on Good Friday. There's got to be a Good Friday. There's got to be something dying. And you go, no, I don't want stuff to die. We don't want stuff to die. But something has to die in order for our eyes to be opened, for our life to be open, for our heart to be open to what God has for us. Now, it's different for everybody. So, if something dies in my life, you don't say, I've got to go through what Scott goes through, or, any of you. It's all different. But the law, the spiritual law is something has to die. You have to let something go. And I mean really let it go. Not like, and take it back. I mean, we do that. But something has to die. And that's the glory of Jesus, is that in his life, every day that he walked the earth, when he experienced people's pain or suffering or sin or bad choices or whatever, sickness and stuff all around him, brokenness all around him, something inside of him died. Not just on the cross, but he went through that every single day. Something inside of him died when he experienced suffering around him. But he held that in his heart. Just like Mother Mary held that in his heart. But he did it really well, too. And he traveled with that. He was a man of sorrows, as Isaiah 53 tells us. A man of sorrows. Yet he was the author of joy also. And so, this idea of shifting, going back to God shifting us, we go, yeah, God, this is like my self-improvement program, you know? Come on, shift me. And God says, well, but something's going to need to die here. What? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that in the contract. Something needs to die. And with every shift, we leave something behind. It's not always bad stuff. Sometimes it's good stuff, good people, good relationships, whatever. But it's a letting go. There's always a letting go of point A so that you can be shifted to point B. And the trust thing here with God is that point B is a better place to be. The problem is that we get used to point B. We build homes and stuff, and that's our estate. You know, we go, I'm here. I'm on point B. But we forget about point C and D and E and F and G and H and I. And then it goes on and on and on because it's a continual process. And we tend to kind of become squatters, and we want to stay in one place. And then God says, oh, it's time to shift again. What? I've only been here for 50 years. So God shifts us. He shifts us. And I'd like to talk about 4 major shifts this morning. 4 major shifts that are in the Bible, and especially in the New Testament, and especially in the life of Jesus. 4 major shifts. And maybe you don't identify with all of them, you know, where you are in your life. But maybe you'll identify with one of these shifts. Maybe, and to help you, I don't do this too often, but I have a handout and there are a few blanks to fill in. So you're going to need a, Kat's going, oh my goodness, is there a test? You're going to need a pen, so find a pen that works. And you can fill in the blanks. And for those of you who like to do this sort of thing, and I know there aren't many of you, but this is your day, you're going to be in hog heaven because you get to fill in the blanks and feel successful. Because this is like one of the easiest things that you can do. You're staying after school, young lady. But you can look at a sheet. And here we go. Major shifts from Jesus. Couple for you guys. One for Mrs. Clock, too. Okay. 4 major shifts of thinking from Jesus. And there's others, too. I mean, I just identified the ones that I see are major, but maybe you'll think of some others, too. It's where God is shifting you. Okay. The first one, if you look under number 1 there, the first major shift in the Bible, and especially from Jesus, is from law to, what do you think? Love. Did somebody say love? Good job. Law to love. From law to love. And the idea is that you no longer, and it's so weird because sometimes as churches, we get into rules and regulations and stuff like this, right? Maybe some more than others. We're trying to, and there's a place for laws, of course. There's a place for restrictions and rules and things like that. most of the place, and Paul brings this out in the New Testament, is that they are restrictions. They basically restrict bad things that you might do, okay, like running a red light and running into a car or something like that. That laws and regulations limit the damage that you can do as a human being, okay, either as an individual or as a society or country or whatever. So laws limit us, limit the damage, the negative stuff. But they're not much good at helping us experience the fullness of life. So if you stop at laws, if you stop at rules, I mean even good rules, the Ten Commandments, or different kinds of rules to live by, words of wisdom to live by, if you stop there, you'll never experience the fullness of what God has for you. So rules are good, but they're limited in value. And the New Testament is big on this, and so is Jesus. In fact, he even takes some of the rules in the Sermon on the Mount, for example, and he'll say, well, it was said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that this is the way stuff happens. And Jesus says, but I say to you, and he does this a number of times, where he'll take a good rule, but he'll say, here's what's really cool. Mercy, compassion, love. Here's how we can really express and live into the fullness of what God has. And so love isn't just a feeling. It's not New Testament wise or not by Jesus. It has a definite shape to it. So love isn't just like, oh, I feel lovey feelings. And it's not a license to do whatever you want to do. That love, in a sense, it's not a rule thing, but it's a shape. It has its own kind of definition to it. And in the New Testament, it's always sacrificial. It's always sacrificial. You're always giving to somebody else. You say, well, what's in it for me, Well, you find out when you do give to somebody else, you give your life away, that you get it back. That's where the abundance comes from. And that's the death, I guess, would be, letting go of your own life, like Jesus says. And you let go of your own life, you go, but wait, something's happening. I'm actually open and being filled with a life as a gift from a wonderful giver. And you're open to things all around you. And you don't realize that holding on to life so tightly keeps you from understanding what the bigger life is all about. It keeps you from being shifted to a new and wonderful place. So law comes into love. It's not that the laws all go away, but we understand them in a whole new way. We understand them in a whole new way. It's a larger, bigger perspective. It's a shift from law to love. The second one is our understanding of power and how to exercise power. And all of us exercise power in our own lives. Emotional power, mental power, physical power, to make the life that we want to have, right? We work hard, we use power. Well, Jesus brings us to a shift in understanding that power. The next one is from power over to power under. From power over to power under. Most of the power, especially when we get frustrated or mad, and I've experienced that recently, we want to change things. We want to fix people. We want to fix situations because they're not doing what we want them to do. And we get a lot of energy. We get a lot of power, and we want to fix stuff. And it's so hard. This has been one of my shifts over and over and over again. God trying to show me what real power is all about. It's about power under. It's about taking the servant's role. Jesus took like a servant's towel, put it over his arm, washed the disciples' feet. But every day, Jesus was a servant. He said in the book of John, he said, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And everything that Jesus did was a servant thing. He's always serving people. He asked people, well, what do you want? What do you want me to do? And he was honest about it. And this is what God does. Jesus is showing us the glory of God, and God is a servant. Creator God, creator of stars and all planets and all sorts of stuff. the one who holds reality together. The nature of God is a servant. This is a little hard because God operates so differently than we do. From power under. God exists. He's interested in every one of our needs. Oh God, we feel like we have to twist God's arm, to get him to do something. If we'd only allow God to shift us from our little tiny perspective to a larger perspective, we could see, okay, so that's what you're up to. It's almost like opposite, He does things so differently because, and this is one of the reasons, he operates from power under, a servant role. A servant role. Okay, shift number 3. And we'll have some discussion on this too, this whole thing about being shifted. Maybe you have a shift story or questions on this. But anyway, number 3 is from exclusion to, what do you think I'm going to say? Inclusion. You get a gold star, Chuck. Inclusion. And I've grown in this because I was an exclusive Christian. In my earlier days, I would see I'm reading the Bible right and I'm doing all these things right, and it's too bad for those other folks who don't get it. I'm sorry, I'll pray for them, and all the arrogance that goes along with that. I was an exclusive Christian, and I would not relate to the unholy people or people with unholy thoughts or whatever. And I began reading and seeing and allowing God to shift me. If you read what Jesus is doing and saying in the Gospels, that's one of the reasons he got killed, was because he was including people in his life, loving people in his life, who society said, you don't love those guys, they're bad. They think wrong, they drink too much, they smoke too much, they are dirty, smelly, they don't follow the rules, they're bad people. We don't touch them. We don't talk to them. What's wrong with you, Jesus? And Jesus would just keep on loving them all the time. What is wrong with you, Jesus? What is wrong with you? But that's the nature of God, to include people. And the thing is that the exclusion part is on our shoulders. That's what we do as human beings. And I'm not saying it's always wrong or bad or whatever. I mean, there are reasons to separate yourself from a bad influence or something that's poisonous in your life or someone who's toxic in your life or whatever. There are certain boundaries to do that. But somehow Jesus did that and still loved people. And I'm not saying this is easy to do. In fact, it's not, but it's a goal. The idea that Jesus kept connection with people, even when he was dying on the cross, good grief, and the soldier that put the spear into his side, all this, somehow Jesus stayed connected with people, even the ones who took his life. How do you do that? And continue to love them and include them. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And I'm not saying this is an easy road, but I'm just saying this is a major shift. People in your life who you have excluded, people in your comings and goings where you've cut that off or cut them off. And I'm not saying, again, there's important stuff or separation sometimes that you have to do, But I'm just saying there's another step. Separation isn't the end. Separating yourself from people isn't the end. That there's another step, there's another perspective. Allow God to shift you. What does it mean to continue to stay connected? Sometimes I talk to people about continuing to pray. Jesus said, love your enemies. And part of that is to pray for them, not lightning bolts or fire to rise up and burn them up, but good things, that you pray for people, that they would understand from their broken perspective that life is so much more than that. And that you don't pray out of bitterness or hatred or revenge, but you pray for God's best will to be done in their life. maybe that's what including people is all about, even your enemies. And then number 4, talking mostly about what we call sacred space. And in the Old Testament, it was all connected to buildings, particularly the temple or synagogues. In our day, it's connected with churches and buildings and sacred kinds of space. We go, well, we're going to God's house. How many times, as a little kid, I grew up in the Episcopal church, right? And there's priests and, everybody's all dressed up and got their little hats on and stuff like this. So it's fairly formal, especially where I grew up. And, don't run in church, or, don't giggle in church, or don't talk when the priest is talking, or whatever, and, hands slapped or whatever. Let's not go into all of that. But it's just that the building itself, that was where God lived. And then you go home and whatever happens, happens. But this idea that a shift took place with Jesus, and particularly with the temple. There's this one deal where they're standing in front of the temple, and there's all this gold and stuff. It's a beautiful temple in Jerusalem, right? All this gold, it's shiny, it's beautiful, big old temple. It towers over all the other buildings in Jerusalem. There's the Temple Mount, all this gold. And the disciples, well, it depends on which story you read, but disciples or others are just saying, wow, what an amazing building. Look at all that gold. It is so cool. And then Jesus, Mr. Party Crasher, right? Jesus is standing there and he just goes, yeah, destroy that temple, but I'll raise it up in 3 days. And again, it's like, what? Who brought Jesus along? Really? Destroy this temple and I will raise it up in 3 days. And then if you're reading the book of John, it's careful to explain stuff. There's always like parentheses in John because we don't understand what's he saying. Jesus was talking about the temple of his body. He's talking about his body. So they're admiring this building, and Jesus is signaling a shift where the presence of God, because that's where God lived, right, in the temple. And the fire was there and Holy of Holies and only the priest could see it and all this stuff. But Jesus is signaling a shift taking place that's not about the temple, it's about him. And I will raise it up, destroy this temple, and I will raise it up. And that's Easter morning. Jesus is being raised up. Then Paul takes that shift again, talking to the Corinthians. We studied this when we looked at 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Paul says, you are the temple of the Holy Spirit. That's where the Holy Spirit lives. It's not in buildings made of stone. It's in you. You've got this fire, this divine presence in your life. The glory of God is in you. Pay attention to it. This is important. So the shift takes place, sacred space, and it's okay to have, we have reminders like Jesus and the Lamb and stained glass windows and things like this to remind us, they're pointers towards Jesus, to remind us that not only this space, but every space that you go into during the week is sacred space. Because you carry the light of the Holy Spirit, the light of the living God inside of you. You can choose to see it or not. Doesn't change the reality that God is inside of you. And the more that we pay attention to that, we get shifted to a whole new perspective. Imagine that if you actually believe that God was living inside of you or living inside of other people. That God is active and present to be paid attention to and recognized that God is always around us. But he's in you too, to be paid attention to. You are the new temple of the Holy Spirit. You go, I don't deserve that. No, you don't. But God does it anyway. Because God's that well, there's another shift, probably a fifth shift, from scarcity to generosity. there's another. There are so many shifts. It's amazing. But we just looked at 4. But it signals a whole new way of thinking. But God will not shift you unless you give him permission. You can stay where you are. You can live inside your tiny box, call it home. And God will be as big as you allow your little box to be in your life. However, if you say the radical prayer, right? If you say the radical prayer and say, okay, God, every part of my life, connect me in new ways to nature around me, my family, my friends, the work that you have me to do, everything changes. I'm open to that. Teach me. Teach me truth, the truth of your presence, the glory of your heart. Teach me about all this stuff, because I don't know about this. But show me what that means. You give God permission, and stuff will begin to happen. And I mean not just one time, though that's good, but the next day when you get up. Your feet hit the floor. Okay, God, what are we going to do today? The next day, your feet hit the floor. Okay, God, what's going on? And God becomes your companion, your friend, who will teach you, your master, your rabbi, who will teach you each and every day. And as he teaches you, shifts take place, and you will be given a choice, because you'll know that you'll have to let go of something, some sort of connection, something that maybe you've held dear. God will say, it's time to leave that in order to move over here. And we'll go, can't I take it with me? And Jesus will go, no, not really. And we'll go. And that's where we choose. Choose to be shifted. Choose to change that perspective, to let go of some things that maybe God is challenging you to let go of. And it's different for each and every one of us. But dare to ask the question. I invite you to ask the question, God, where do you want to shift me? What do you want to do with me? Where do you want to move me? So have you had experiences in your life where God has shifted you, where life has shifted you, where you've found a whole new perspective? Maybe you've hit your head against the wall. Maybe it was really, really frustrating. But have you had an experience where you've experienced a shift of some sort, and you go, oh, share about it. Lisa?